Most people think the problem in difficult conversations is what's being said. But in reality, the problem is how we say it. You can have all the right facts, all the logic, all the good intentions, and still lose the person you're talking to because your delivery shuts them down. Communication isn't about winning. It's about understanding. And if you've been struggling to get through to someone at work, in your relationship, or even with a friend, chances are you've been talking all wrong. You listen to respond, not to understand. And that's where most conversations start to break down. When we're in a difficult moment, our minds don't go quiet, they speed up. We start mentally building our next sentence, our next defense, our next gotcha point before the other person even finishes talking. It's like we're playing chess in our heads while the other person is still trying to explain how they feel. The problem with that is simple. If you're focused on responding, you're not actually hearing. You might be hearing the words, but you're missing the message. You're missing the emotion underneath, the frustration behind the tone, the fear behind the silence. When you listen just to respond, you're prioritizing being heard over understanding, and that's a guaranteed way to make the other person feel dismissed, even if you didn't mean to. We think listening means waiting for our turn to talk, but true listening is an act of empathy, not endurance. It means setting aside the need to be right long enough to understand why the other person feels the way they do. It's not agreement. It's awareness. It's the difference between I hear you and I get you. Most people can tell when you're waiting to reply instead of actually paying attention. Your eyes drift, your tone tightens, your responses get shorter, and suddenly they shut down. The irony is the harder we try to defend ourselves, the less the other person feels safe enough to open up. And that's when conflict turns into silence or shouting. Two different forms of disconnection. Listening to understand means you stop trying to win the conversation and start trying to learn from it. It means you give the other person space to finish their thoughts without rushing in to correct, justify, or fix. You'd be surprised how quickly tension dissolves when someone feels genuinely heard. Because most of the time, people aren't asking you to solve their problem. They're asking you to recognize it. In difficult conversations, listening isn't passive, it's powerful. It takes patience to not interrupt when you're accused of something unfair. It takes humility to ask, "Help me understand what you mean by that," instead of firing back with, "That's not what happened." When you do that, you shift the energy from defense to discovery. You go from protecting your point of view to exploring theirs. That's where progress begins. Understanding doesn't mean you agree with everything. It means you're mature enough to acknowledge that more than one truth can exist at the same time. Think about it. When was the last time someone truly listened to you? No interruptions, no judgments, no but moments. You probably felt safe, respected, maybe even calmer. That's exactly what you give the other person when you choose to listen to understand. You lower their guard because you're not attacking it. You invite honesty because you're not punishing it. People mirror what they receive. When you listen calmly, they start to speak calmly. When you respond with curiosity instead of defensiveness, they start to open up instead of shutting down. So, if you want to change the outcome of your next difficult conversation, start by changing your goal. Don't listen to load your next statement. Listen to locate their truth. Don't treat listening like a pause before your turn. Treat it like the most important part of the exchange, because it is. The person who listens with intention controls the direction of the conversation. Understanding doesn't end conflict, it transforms it. And when you learn to listen not for the answer, but for the meaning, you stop reacting to the noise and start connecting to the person behind it. You lead with emotion, not clarity. And that's the fastest way to lose control of a difficult conversation. When tension rises, logic tends to leave the room first. You feel your heartbeat pick up, your tone sharpen, your words move faster. You want to be understood so badly that you forget to be intentional. The moment emotion takes over, clarity disappears, and you end up saying things you don't mean just to make your point land harder. But emotion-driven communication doesn't create understanding. It creates resistance. When your voice gets louder, the other person's ears get smaller. You can't be both heated and heard at the same time. The truth is, calmness isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's emotional discipline. It's knowing how to pause when your brain tells you to react. Leading with clarity means you're not speaking from your triggers. You're speaking from your truth. You take a breath before you respond. You let the silence do some of the work, because silence in moments of tension is power. It gives you the space to choose your words carefully instead of weaponizing them. Clarity doesn't mean you suppress emotion. It means you guide it. You translate what you feel into something that can be received, not rejected. When you lead with emotion, your message becomes about you. Your frustration, your anger, your need to be right. But when you lead with clarity, your message becomes about the issue. You stop turning people into problems and start addressing the actual problem. That's what separates reaction from resolution. Emotional communication often sounds like blame. You never listen. You always do this. Clear communication sounds like ownership. When that happens, I feel unheard. That shift changes everything. It disarms the other person because it's not an attack. It's information. It invites cooperation instead of defensiveness. Most people don't realize how contagious tone is. If you walk into a conversation on fire, don't be surprised when everything burns. Your tone sets the emotional thermostat of the discussion. If you're calm, the room cools down. If you're sharp, the room tenses up. The goal isn't to suppress emotion, it's to regulate it. Because when you can stay calm while someone else is losing control, you instantly become the anchor in that conversation. You show that you can handle intensity without adding to it. That's what earns respect, and that's what creates influence. People don't listen to the loudest voice. They listen to the most centered one. Leading with clarity also means being intentional about your pace and words. Speak slower when things get heated. Pause before responding. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say in a tense moment is nothing, just a breath. That pause gives your mind the chance to move from emotional reaction to logical thought. It's in that small gap where maturity lies, because clarity isn't just about what you say. It's about what you don't say. It's knowing that not every reaction deserves a response, and not every accusation needs to be answered immediately. You gain more ground through calm consistency than through emotional bursts. So before your next difficult conversation, check your emotional temperature. Ask yourself, am I reacting or responding? Am I trying to express truth or unload tension? The difference between chaos and clarity isn't what happens to you. It's how you choose to show up. When you learn to lead with clarity instead of emotion, you stop letting the conversation control you and start leading it. The calm voice in the storm always gets heard because clarity speaks louder than anger ever could. And when you speak from clarity, even conflict starts to listen. You try to prove instead of connect, and that's why so many conversations turn into battles instead of bridges. The moment you focus on proving your point, you stop trying to understand theirs. You move from being a participant in the conversation to a prosecutor building a case. Every sentence becomes evidence. Every pause becomes an opening for your argument. But relationships aren't courtrooms. And communication isn't about winning. When you make being right your goal, you might win the argument, but you lose the person. Connection isn't built on victory. It's built on understanding. And the truth is, no one has ever felt closer to someone who keeps trying to prove they're wrong. When you focus on proving, you listen to reply, not to relate. You look for flaws in the other person's statement instead of trying to understand what they mean. And once you do that, you're no longer in a dialogue, you're in a debate. The problem is debates need an audience, but conversations need presence. When you turn communication into competition, you push the other person into defense mode. Their guard goes up, and no matter how valid your points are, they can't hear them. Because people don't absorb truth when they feel attacked. They shut down. They protect themselves. They fight back. Not because they hate you, but because they don't feel safe with you in that moment. Connection starts when you make curiosity more important than control. Instead of trying to prove a point, try to understand a perspective. Ask questions like, "Can you help me see what you mean?" Or, "What made you feel that way?" You'd be amazed how much easier it is to resolve conflict. When the other person feels like you actually care about their viewpoint, the goal isn't to agree on everything. It's to create a space where both truths can coexist without one overpowering the other. You don't have to surrender your beliefs to connect. You just have to stop treating the conversation like a contest, because clarity grows in calm spaces, not in verbal to-go wars. When you prioritize connection, your tone changes too. You stop sounding like you're defending yourself and start sounding like you're trying to understand. And that tone shift is powerful. It invites openness. It tells the other person, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to figure this out." That's when walls start to drop. People mirror the energy you give them. If you come in aggressive, they match it. If you come in grounded, they soften. The tone you use determines whether the conversation builds a bridge or burns one. You can't outshout someone into agreement, but you can outlisten them into understanding. One of the hardest lessons in communication is realizing that you can be right and still be wrong in how you deliver it. You can have all the facts, all the logic, all the evidence, and still make someone feel unseen or disrespected. And when that happens, your truth loses its power. Because how you say something often matters more than what you say. The point of communication isn't to impress, it's to connect. You don't need to win every point. You need to create enough safety for the other person to actually consider your point. That's how change happens, not through pressure, but through presence. So the next time you catch yourself trying to prove, pause. Ask yourself, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? Because they're not the same thing. Being right feeds your ego, but being effective builds your relationship. When you let go of the need to win, you make room for understanding to grow. Connection doesn't mean you lose ground. It means you build common ground. And in the end, that's where real communication lives. Not in proving who's right, but in remembering what really matters, the relationship between you and the person sitting across from you. You invalidate before you clarify, and that's one of the fastest ways to shut down a difficult conversation. When someone opens up about how they feel, their first need isn't correction, it's connection. But often we jump in too quickly with words like, "That's not true," "You're overreacting," or "That's not what I meant." Those phrases might sound harmless in your mind, but to the other person, they feel like rejection. The moment you invalidate what someone feels, the wall between you gets higher. Because people don't just want to be heard, they want to feel understood. And if they don't feel safe expressing emotion, they'll stop trying to communicate altogether. Clarifying before invalidating doesn't mean you agree with everything being said. It means you respect that what the other person feels is real to them, even if you see it differently. It's the difference between saying "that's ridiculous" and asking, "Can you tell me more about why you feel that way?" The first shuts them down. The second opens them up. Validation doesn't remove accountability. It builds trust. When you acknowledge someone's perspective, you give them the safety they need to hear yours. People listen differently when they don't feel dismissed. They lower their guard when they feel seen. The problem is we often fear that validation equals agreement. We think if we say, "I understand you're hurt," it means we're admitting fault. But that's not what it means. It means you're emotionally intelligent enough to separate feelings from facts. You can recognize their pain without taking all the blame. And ironically, that kind of understanding often makes it easier to resolve conflict, because when someone feels heard, they stop yelling to prove a point. The conversation becomes less about defending themselves and more about solving the problem together. You can't move forward with someone who's still fighting to be understood. Invalidation often happens by reflex, not intention. We hear something that sounds exaggerated or unfair, and we immediately rush to correct it. But when you do that, you're responding to your discomfort, not their pain. You're trying to fix how you feel instead of understanding how they feel. It's human, but it's also costly, because when people feel unseen, they don't forget it. They withdraw. They protect. They start editing themselves around you. Over time, you lose access to their honesty. And once honesty leaves a relationship, communication turns into performance. People say what's safe, not what's true. Learning to clarify before you invalidate takes patience. It means slowing down enough to say, "I want to make sure I understand you before I respond." It means being curious instead of defensive. That small shift can completely change the tone of the discussion. When you give someone the chance to explain what they meant before you jump to conclusions, you replace judgment with understanding. And that doesn't just calm the moment, it strengthens the relationship, because when people feel heard, they start to listen. Communication stops being a fight for airtime and becomes a collaboration for understanding. So the next time someone tells you they're hurt, don't rush to prove them wrong. Pause. Listen, reflect back what you heard before you explain your side. Say, "It sounds like you felt ignored," or "I can see why that would upset you." You're not agreeing with every word, or you're honoring their experience. And that acknowledgement is what opens the door to clarity, because people can only receive truth after they feel seen. When you lead with validation, you turn conflict into connection, and that's where real resolution begins. Not when someone wins the argument, but when both people finally feel understood. You talk to win, not to resolve. And that's where most conversations start to fall apart. When your goal is to win, the conversation becomes a competition, not a connection. Every word turns into a move on a chessboard. Every silence feels like an opportunity to strike. And the focus shifts from solving the problem to proving who's smarter, stronger, or more in control. But difficult conversations aren't meant to be battles. They're meant to be bridges. The truth is, if one person walks away feeling defeated, both people lose. Because communication isn't about victory. It's about mutual understanding. The moment you start trying to win, you stop trying to listen. When you talk to win, you're no longer speaking to understand, you're speaking to dominate. You interrupt more, listen less, and use your tone to assert power instead of building connection. You start focusing on your best arguments instead of your best attitude. That's when tension escalates. Not because the topic is impossible to resolve, but because your ego has taken over the conversation. And ego has one rule. It doesn't care about peace. It cares about pride. But pride can't coexist with understanding. If your goal is to come out on top, the other person will always feel pushed down. You might win the round, but you'll lose the relationship. Resolution, on the other hand, is about restoration. It's about finding a way forward that preserves the relationship while addressing the issue. When you talk to resolve, your goal shifts from attacking to aligning. You're not asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" You're asking, "How can we get back on the same page?" That simple mindset shift changes your tone, your body language, and even your word choice. You start using phrases like, "Let's figure this out together," instead of, "You just don't get it." That difference matters. It lowers the emotional temperature of the room and opens space for solutions instead of sarcasm. People often forget that resolution requires emotional safety. You can't find understanding in a hostile environment. If someone feels cornered, they'll fight back, not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to. When you approach a difficult conversation with the intent to win, you create an opponent. But when you approach it with the intent to resolve, you create a partner. The same person who resists you when they feel attacked will cooperate with you when they feel respected. That's why calmness is more powerful than aggression. You don't win people over by overpowering them. You win them over by making them feel safe enough to open up. Talking to resolve means being willing to let go of the need to have the last word. It means asking yourself what matters more, being right or being at peace. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is choose the relationship over the argument. That doesn't mean you ignore the issue or silence yourself. It means you express